You're listening to Women's Issues, Women's Voices on 89.5 KOPN Columbia. I'm one of your co-hosts, Corri, Flaker, Fraser. Women's Issues, Women's Voices is a feminist talk show with a rotating group of hosts. We offer a platform for women to share stories, discuss political issues, and offer concepts to expand the perceptual lens. On the last Monday of every month, Vic Day and I co-host the Goddess Hour. In these episodes, we explore divine feminine archetypes through embodiment, meditation, stories, and more. In this episode, we've invited Marisa Calvi to talk to us about her podcast, Once Upon a Goddess. You can find her podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can also see her transcripts and a little bit more about the show at onceuponagoddess.net. Marisa weaves stories of chosen goddesses in history that go beyond the stories of Wikipedia. She's a fantastic storyteller, and Vic and I have used her podcast as resource and inspiration. So we wanted to invite her here to learn more about how she puts together her shows and to share her talents with you, our KOPN listeners. Hey, Marisa, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
Yes,
and Vic's here too.
Thank you for getting up early in the morning to record this while we're recording it in the evening. So just share a little bit. My story about how I discovered this podcast is one night I was feeling just the weight of the world and heavy, uninspired. And I just really felt the child in me saying, oh, I just want a story. I just want somebody to read me a story, like when I was a little kid. And I think what I Googled was adult story goddess, and this popped up, Once Upon a Goddess. And I was laying in the bath, doing my ritual bath in the dark, nice smells. And I listened to the story of Lilith, and just your voice, Marisa, the words of the story. Right now I'm getting goosebumps, right? I cried, I cheered, I came out of that bath a new woman. And I knew that, that this was something that this was a show that I wanted to do at some point with you. And I'm so glad that you were as interested in being a part of it as I was in inviting. So I talked to Corri, and she said, yes, that sounds perfect for the Goddess Hour. And so here we are.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you found Lilith's story. So a little bit about my background. I'm an author and I write sort of historical fiction with a spiritual side to it. I still am working with the energy of the Ascended Master Katumi Lao Singh, who's a wonderful Indian-born master who was a wonderful blend of masculine and feminine. And I was writing up his life stories of all his incarnations on Earth. And I'd kind of gotten a bit of a block with my writing there and sort of took a break from that. And part of my spiritual journey, I started working with a wonderful lady called Anne Bromley in the UK, who was doing some wonderful new work, not necessarily new to me, some work called Womb Awakening. And it was a wonderful way to dive into the divine feminine and the divine masculine and explore that more within my journey. And part of that too was I was wanting a new creative outlet to hopefully get my writing going a bit more. And I wanted to have a podcast. Everyone's doing a podcast. I want a podcast too. I had some experience in community radio, and I thought, I can do a bit more of that radio work, which I love. Mm-hmm. And maybe I can combine it with my writing. And I thought, wouldn't it be beautiful? All these beautiful goddess stories, these stories which are the essence of divine feminine. I can go and explore these stories And so I can be broadcasting, writing, and exploring the divine feminine even more. And to bring these stories in a way that, like you said, people can sit down and listen to them, almost like a fairy tale. But to hear their stories as if they're living beings, so we can go there and be with them in their experience, and even just to listen, to feel what that was like for them, and for it to wake up and remind us of parts of us that we've been put to sleep. So that's where it all sort of came from. So I'm having a lot of fun exploring. I try and vary which culture they come from, the time frames. I'm doing some that are actual living people that are now what you would consider saints. But I just love that each story, there's something you can take away from it to live with, to learn about, and to remember. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a line in your introduction, and I meant to write it down because every time I hear it, it strikes me where you I feel like I can almost see you presenting the podcast as a informational, historical,
Yeah.
and then you say, or like you can, I think you say something like you can light a candle.
Yeah, you can take a deep breath, just
take,
breathe it in. Yeah,
and invite this story into you as like a sacred act.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. I might change the actual wording. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what resonated for me, is because I feel like that's the same thing, Corri, that you and I are doing. Is, we try to tell these stories so that they're part of our history, part of our culture as humans, and then also for those who want to feel it deeper and deeper, like that is also what we're offering.
Absolutely.
I think that what we offer in our shows strikes a common chord with everyone, not just women, not just men, not just one side of the political scale or the other. It's just we are like bringing up these ancient stories to help people remember, because some of these ancient stories, we don't want them to be forgotten because they were told for a reason.
Absolutely. It's like these stories don't exist in a vacuum. They weren't just someone like today writing a book, or they were stories that were created to help us understand life, understand our place in the world and the universe. And they're just keys to so much of us getting back to what I'd say the essence of our actual existence should actually be about. We've got it so cluttered with technology and politics and everything. To strip all that back to just being these wonderful human beings existing. Yeah.
It makes me think of that book, The American Gods, and I can't remember the author's name. It's escaping me right now, but where, it's been years since I read it, but basically him talking about how the gods and the goddesses are still living amongst us, but we just don't worship them in the way that we did, but the energies are still there. Now, Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins does the same thing, where he's like, Pan is still among us, living among us, but we don't, most of us, I mean, not everyone, thankfully, but like, right, that there is this resurgence of honoring those energies that have been with humanity since the beginning of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you choose, Marisa?
How do I choose? I have a little bit of fun doing that, because I kind of let the goddess come to me. I have a few like beautiful like oracle decks, like goddess card decks. I've got another lovely book, which is and sometimes I'll just flip through the cards and who wants to talk to me? Who wants their story told? sometimes, yeah, and I have a bit of fun each day. I choose a little goddess to write just a little snippet about on my social media pages, and sometimes I'll be doing one of them. I'm like, oh, your story we need to go into yours a bit more. Yeah, so I have a bit of fun with that. So apart from sort of making sure I sort of mix up where I'm going, yeah, I kind of let them sort of say who's ready for their story to be shared as well.
So it's almost like just saying, flipping through an address book and saying, who am I going to call today? Who
Exactly.
am I going to text? And then
Exactly.
sometimes it's a little short exchange by text, and then sometimes it's a deeper conversation.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. Absolutely. Sometimes I'll hit a bit of a dead end. It's like, oh, this isn't okay. That was a quick visit, but you're not the story to be told, and so just move on. So yeah, but it's a lot of fun playing with that and finding whose story is going to be told next. Yeah.
So something that Corri and I have discovered, maybe and it hasn't been intentional, but that there are goddess archetypes that one or the other of us has some resistance to.
Sure.
And then as we start studying it, discovering aspects that make it more accessible. Have you found that in your process? Are there any that, like, when they come up, you're like, no.
Oh, for
No.
example, Kuan Yin, we did Kuan Yin last year, and Vic's like, oh,
Ugh.
she's so but then the more we explore, like there's a little resistance. And then when we explored her a little more, she's like, oh, okay. I understand this better.
I had no respect for Kuan Yin.
Oh, wow.
It was like it had been, Kuan Yin had been shoved at me on more than one occasion, and I felt like she was like passive. And then when we started researching her, and I really was able to like hear the story on my own, like I felt like it changed me, because I was like, oh, I can finally accept that, the mother of compassion.
Yeah.
And it not being that, like, not the mother of caretaking.
Right. That's interesting, because I think that will come with, like, if there's some part of you that is, that is probably resisting a bit of change, and if that goddess is, you see that as a representation of that, you probably wouldn't want to connect with her so much. I just find it interesting you brought up Kuan Yin, because she's someone I've been very close with for about 20 years.
Well, I was going to ask you that, whether you had certain, So to give you insight, the goddess that has called me for 30 years has been Bridget. Very different energy. Very different energy. Yeah.
Yes, that is a very different energy. And I suppose, in modern times too, the goddesses are getting portrayed in very almost cliched ways sometimes. And that cliche in itself can be something we don't want to be part of. So it is, like you said, to go deeper into the roots of the story, because even with Kuan Yin, who I thought I knew so well, when I finally went into, okay, let's go into the origins of your story, the different aspects of your story, and I got exposed to a whole different side of Kuan Yin, which made me love her even more. But like you said, there is so much more to these stories when we really want to dive in deeper to them, rather than the cliche that often we're presented with, even within the spiritual community. It gets very easy. I find Kali, I love Kali, the warrior goddess, but I find she can be quite, she can kind of be dragged out and thrown out as being, a bit righteous. But she wasn't, she was far from righteous, there was so much more to her than, that righteous energy is great. And it's something that it's very easy for, especially women in today, to want to grab onto, to hopefully pull us through some inequalities. But so I can understand it can be very easy to sort of say, oh, no, I don't want to be part of that. But they've all got something to offer. And maybe if you don't feel the resonance to one, that's fine. That's like same with my story. Sometimes one will come up and I just doesn't feel like that's something I want to explore right now. So I do kind of acknowledge that probably each goddess I explore in my stories is something I want to hear at the time as well. So yeah.
Well, when we explored Kali, what we've discovered is that we brought a lot in about the nervous system.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Kali,
Oh,
you know, that Kali is the nervous system that gets pushed and pushed until like it's in the sympathetic, and
yes.
it's,
Yes.
you know, there is no uh reasoning, there is no attachment. It's just action towards protection.
Yes.
And so that's how we explored Kali.
Yeah,
That's a
we
beautiful
also
perspective on her.
and boundary setting too.
Boundary
That
And
was what we,
boundary set. Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that anger has its place,
Yes.
and that in our culture, people are often pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until that sort of righteous anger is all that they feel that they have. You know,
Yes.
and going back to the whole self-soothing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, that was a lot too about that balance between that masculine and feminine within us as well.
Mhm.
And I know that for me, that was a big story about, you know, the aggression. We see that with that sort of toxic masculinity as well. It's so easy for it to go out of balance.
Mhm.
And having that imbalance with the divine feminine, so we can have that anger, like you said, for boundary setting, for protection, but to have it also with that grace and compassion to temper it as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that when we were studying Kali is a lot about, um, you know, that old saying, don't believe everything you think. It's also don't believe everything you see. I mean, if you see a
Yes.
snapshot of Kali and she's holding this head and she's
Yes.
catching the blood in a bowl,
Yes.
and you don't do any research, and you're just like, oh, she's bloodthirsty. And then you
Yes.
actually
crazy woman.
right, yeah, you know, but then if
Yeah.
you dive into that and find out that, I mean, she's catching that blood because that's what's actually lessening the harm, so she doesn't have
Yeah.
to keep staying in that
Yes.
enraged state. She's, you know, it's a whole
Yes.
different story. It's a
It is a whole different story. I remember the first time I saw a picture of her, a massive painting of her in India, and if at first with what with what I knew at the time, you would think she's a demon.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you, like you said, you go into the elements of everything depicted in the story, and like her hair, like, you know, all the other goddesses are beautifully groomed and in serene poses, but that hair being loose was to show how unfettered she was. You know, the tongue sticking out was because that she used that to also catch the blood, like you said, to temper the violence. So yeah, it is wonderful when you go into it. There's so much more.
Well, and then we talked about the nervous system and the connection between the tongue and the jaw with the my brain just went
Right.
the nerve. What's the
The,
nerve?
vagus
Vagus
The
nerve.
vagus
Yeah.
nerve.
Yeah, which is so, yes.
You know, and that by expressing herself,
Yeah.
right, actually releasing the toxic chemicals of aggression. And that's the irony, is that she's
Yes.
actually, she's doing something that's helping her settle. But in our culture, when we see it, we're like, oh, that's bad.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite so far of all the podcasts that you've done? Is that sort of like asking you to pick the favorite of your children?
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. You talked about Lilith, and I so adore her. Oh, wow.
Was Lilith your first one?
No, Kuan Yin
No.
actually was. And I did
Oh.
Kuan Yin as she was a bit of a homage as well, because I'd been introduced to her by a wonderful spiritual teacher of mine who also had just passed away when I was starting the podcast. So it was a bit of a homage to not only the goddess who had been one of the biggest parts of transformation in my life, but also I also did that as a little bit of a dedication to my teacher Norma, who had passed away. So yeah, and it was kind of like I wanted to start with someone I kind of knew as well. It was a bit of a comfort thing as well to start with someone I knew.
Now, isn't that interesting? Because I've listened to all of them and I completely blanked out that you did Kuan Yin.
Okay, there
I
you
will
go.
have to go back and listen. Yeah.
Yeah, I also do adore Oshun, who is one of the African goddesses. I just love her story because she's sent to Earth with half a dozen of her brothers to create everything. And when they get here, she starts to go, okay, we think we should do this. And they go, oh, look, you're just the little sister. We don't want to listen to you. And they ignored her. So she thought, well, okay, you're going to ignore me. So she goes off to the moon and does her hair and just sits there and chills out. And then the other gods go back to the creator god and say, look, nothing's going right, you know, because Oshun was taking care of the water. And when she wasn't there for the waters to flow, everything fell apart.
Right.
And the father says, well, where's your sister? Where's your sister? And they go, and they have to go, and they go, get her back. And you're not just going to get her back, you're going to say sorry to her. And the brothers apologize to Oshun. And it's my favorite bit. She turns around and says, that's okay. Don't do it again. And I love that. And then once she's there and the waters are flowing properly and being taken care of, everything thrives and flourishes again. So she's another one of my favorites. So I just love that. It wasn't that passive, yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
And I think that's a really great place for us to segue the closing of this first half. So listeners, if you're just tuning in, this is the Goddess Hour. This is, we always air the Goddess Hour on the final Monday of the month as part of Women's Issues, Women's Voices. And if you want to go back and listen to the first half, the archive is available on KOPN.org for 2 weeks after the show is aired. I'll also be sharing the video footage of the interview on my personal YouTube channel, which is Embodiment, Live Life More Fully. You can also reach out to us to find out this information by either going to Women's Issues, Women's Voices on Facebook or writing to us at WIWV@KOPN.org and make sure that you put something about it in the subject line so we know that you want to talk to either me or Corri. And we are talking to Marisa Calvi, who is the creator, the creatrix of Once Upon a Goddess, which is a wonderful podcast. And what we were just talking about Oshun sounds like it would be a really great place for us to start in the second half, just talking about how the early stories were always about equality, not as a political statement, but because that is what nature is about. Does that sound like a good place to wrap this up?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and stay with us and we'll be back in just a few minutes.